alone being a trapeze. What was the training like?
Okay, so our director called me and he said,
He was
listen.
great, by the way.
So amazing.
Growing up is hard when no one is watching. It becomes something else entirely when everyone is. Fame has a pattern when it meets youth. It accelerates everything: success, pressure, expectations, while quietly removing the one thing development needs most: room to make mistakes without consequence. For many young stars, the damage doesn't come from one dramatic collapse. It comes from years of being shaped too early, too publicly, and too permanently. We've seen how this usually ends: burnout disguised as rebellion, silence misread as arrogance. Public breakdowns are treated as entertainment instead of warning signs. The story repeats so often that we've come to expect it. But every once in a while, someone moves through that system differently. Someone who grows up in full view without losing control of themselves. Someone who matures without hardening. Someone who becomes more grounded as the pressure increases, not less. That kind of outcome isn't accidental. It doesn't come from luck or perfection. It comes from decisions made quietly, long before anyone notices their importance. From boundaries set early, from guidance taken seriously, from an understanding, rare for someone young, that fame is not a reward, but a condition that must be managed. What makes this story compelling is not that success happened, it's that the collapse didn't happen. Because in an industry that profits from excess, restraint is unusual. And in a culture that rewards visibility, self-control often goes unnoticed. Yet those unseen choices shape everything that follows. This is not a story about being flawless. It's a story about being protected. By intention. About what happens when talent is paired with discipline. When growth is allowed instead of rushed. And when fame arrives early but never takes over. Once you look closely at how this was done, the outcome stops looking miraculous and starts looking deliberate. Zendaya entered the public eye early, but she did not enter it unguarded. That distinction matters more than talent, timing, or luck. Because fame itself is not what breaks young people. What breaks them is exposure without structure. From the beginning, Zendaya's career unfolded inside limits that most young performers never get. Not limits imposed by fear, but by awareness. There was a clear understanding, spoken or unspoken, that success would not be allowed to outrun development. That the person would always matter more than the momentum. This is where her story quietly separates itself from the familiar pattern. As opportunities expanded, so did expectations. The industry tested her availability, her image, her flexibility. It always does. But instead of total access, it encountered consistency. Clear standards. A refusal to be rushed into versions of adulthood that looked good publicly but cost stability privately. Zendaya was never framed as flawless. She was framed as grounded. And grounding does not happen accidentally in Hollywood. It is built through repetition, of boundaries, of values, of restraint. One of the most overlooked factors in her stability is timing. She did not chase premature reinvention. She did not try to outgrow her age publicly. While many young stars feel pressured to prove maturity through shock, excess, or reinvention, Zendaya allowed maturity to arrive naturally. That patience protected her. Patience is rare when the spotlight rewards speed. It requires confidence not just in talent, but in process. Zendaya trusted that growth would be more convincing than performance. That seriousness would arrive through work, not spectacle. That credibility would come from consistency, not controversy. This approach reshaped how the industry responded to her. Instead of trying to mold her into a constant presence, it learned to wait. Instead of demanding explanation, it adjusted expectations. Over time, that recalibration changed the power dynamic. She was no longer reacting to opportunity. Opportunity began aligning with her. Another crucial difference was how visibility was handled. Zendaya did not confuse openness with accessibility. She appeared publicly without surrendering her inner life. Interviews revealed thoughtfulness, not confession. Public moments felt intentional, not exhaustive. There was always a sense that something was being preserved. Preservation is not secrecy. It is selectivity. Young fame often collapses because everything becomes available at once. Personality, emotions, mistakes, relationships. Nothing is held back long enough to stabilize. Zendaya avoided that collapse by understanding that privacy is not withdrawal. It is insulation. That insulation allowed her to make mistakes quietly, to learn without punishment, to adjust without explanation. Those freedoms are invisible to the public, but they are foundational to healthy development. Her transition into more demanding roles reflected the same discipline. There was no rush to abandon her earlier work, no need to disown it to appear serious. She allowed her career to layer instead of rupture. Each phase built on the last, rather than rejecting it. This matters because rejection of the past is often a sign of pressure, not growth. Zendaya did not need to erase who she was to become who she is. That continuity kept her grounded. It preserved identity rather than fracturing it. Equally important was how she handled expectation. Fame creates projection. Audiences decide what someone should represent, how they should behave, when they should change. Zendaya did not internalize those projections, she acknowledged them without serving them. That ability, to observe expectation without obeying it, is rare at any age. At a young age, it is exceptional. It suggests guidance, yes, but also internal clarity. A sense of self that existed before validation and remained intact after it arrived. That clarity acts as an anchor when pressure increases. Without it, even small decisions become destabilizing. Zendaya's public demeanor often reads as composed, but composition is not detachment, it is regulation, the ability to respond instead of react, to choose pace over impulse, to remain present without being consumed. Regulation is learned. It comes from environments where emotions are acknowledged but not exploited, where success is celebrated without being weaponized, where failure is corrected without humiliation. Zendaya appears to have grown within such an environment, and she carried those lessons with her as fame expanded. This does not mean her life was easy, it means difficulty was processed rather than performed. The industry often rewards breakdowns with attention. Zendaya did not provide them. Not because she lacked complexity, but because she refused to turn struggle into currency. That refusal limited spectacle, but it protected integrity. Over time, this approach compounded. Directors trusted her because she was reliable. Audiences respected her because she was consistent. The media followed her because she was thoughtful. None of that required constant exposure. It required alignment between values and behavior. Alignment is what keeps people from falling apart. When who you are publicly matches who you are privately, there is less friction, less performance, less exhaustion. Zendaya's career suggests a person living inside alignment, even as pressure increased. This alignment also reshaped how success felt. Instead of chasing validation, she moved with intention. Instead of measuring progress by volume of attention, she measured it by quality of work. Instead of expanding endlessly, she chose depth. Depth ages better than visibility. This is why her growth appears steady rather than explosive. Why her fame feels durable rather than volatile. Why her presence feels reassuring rather than overwhelming. She did not escape the pressures of growing up famous. She learned how to absorb them without letting them define her. And that ability, quiet, disciplined, and rarely celebrated, is what kept her from becoming another cautionary tale in an industry full of them. The question now is not how she avoided collapse. It's what her path reveals about the conditions required for young success to remain human. And that is where the story deepens. As Zendaya's career expanded beyond its early phase, the real test wasn't success. It was scale. Larger projects bring louder expectations. Bigger platforms invite stronger projections. And for someone who grew up famous, this is often the moment where balance breaks. It didn't. What changed was not her personality, but her positioning. Zendaya became more intentional about where her energy went and where it didn't. She understood something many people learn too late. Not every opportunity deserves a yes, and not every moment needs to be shared to be meaningful. This restraint was especially visible in how she approached visibility. She did not disappear, but she also did not saturate. There were no constant updates, no overexposure cycles, no attempts to stay relevant through noise. Her presence remained selective, and that selectivity preserved credibility. In a culture that rewards constant output, choosing restraint looks like confidence. Zendaya's relationship with social media reflected this balance. She used it as a tool, not a lifeline. There was engagement without dependency, expression without oversharing. This mattered more than it seems. For many young celebrities, online spaces become emotional mirrors, places where validation and criticism arrive instantly and uncontrollably. Zendaya did not let those spaces dictate her internal state. That separation protected her sense of self. Another critical factor was how she handled expectation of representation. As her influence grew, so did the weight placed on her to symbolize things larger than herself. Role model, voice, standard. These labels can flatten a person, turning them into an idea rather than a human being. Zendaya navigated this carefully. She acknowledged responsibility without letting it become identity. She showed awareness without performing perfection. She allowed complexity without turning it into spectacle. That balance prevented the pressure from collapsing inward. Many young stars fall apart when they are forced to carry meanings they never consented to. Zendaya consented selectively. She chose where to speak, when to stay silent, and how much of herself to offer. That choice kept agency intact. Agency is the difference between growth and fracture. Professionally, this agency showed up in her role selection. She did not leap toward adult seriousness for validation. She waited until the material matched her readiness. When she did step into more challenging territory, it felt earned, not forced. That pacing protected her from the whiplash that often comes with abrupt reinvention. Reinvention is exhausting when it's done for approval. Zendaya avoided that exhaustion by letting evolution be gradual. Equally important was her willingness to remain a student. Success did not turn into arrogance. She listened, observed, adjusted. That humility kept her grounded even as praise increased. It also prevented isolation, a common consequence of early fame. Isolation is where instability grows. Zendaya remained connected to mentors, collaborators, and perspectives outside the echo chamber of celebrity. That connection acted as a reality check. It reminded her that fame is a context, not a measure of worth. This grounding shaped how she handled criticism. Instead of reacting defensively or internalizing every opinion, she responded selectively. Some feedback mattered, much of it didn't. Knowing the difference preserved emotional energy. Energy management is rarely discussed, but it is central to longevity. Zendaya did not spend herself trying to satisfy every expectation. She conserved. And conservation is what allows consistency over time. This phase of her life reveals something important. Stability at scale is not passive. It is maintained through repeated, often invisible decisions. Saying no when yes is easier. Waiting when rushing is rewarded. Choosing alignment over applause. Zendaya's growth did not happen because pressure was absent. It happened because pressure was managed. That management required self-awareness beyond her years. It required support systems that reinforced limits rather than exploited access. And it required the courage to move slower than the culture demanded. By this point, it was clear that she was not simply avoiding collapse. She was building durability. Durability does not announce itself. It shows up over time, in steady work, in consistent behavior, in the absence of chaos others expect. Zendaya's durability began to redefine what growing up famous could look like when intention replaces impulse. And it quietly set the stage for the most important part of her story. Not how she survived early fame, but what her survival reveals about the conditions young success actually needs to remain whole. By the time Zendaya reached a level of influence where the industry could no longer ignore her agency, something subtle had already happened. She was no longer being shaped by fame. She was shaping the terms under which fame could exist in her life. This is the stage most people never reach, especially those who became visible young. Early fame usually creates dependency. Approval becomes fuel. Momentum becomes safety. The fear of disappearing keeps people overextended. Zendaya moved in the opposite direction. Instead of clinging to visibility, she treated it as optional. Valuable, yes, but not essential to her sense of stability. That mindset changes everything. When fame is optional, decisions slow down. Anxiety decreases. Identity strengthens. You stop asking what will work publicly and start asking what will last privately. Zendaya's choices began reflecting that shift. Not louder roles, but deeper ones. Not more appearances, but more intentional presence. She allowed herself to be between phases. In Hollywood, being between is dangerous. Gaps invite speculation. Silence invites doubt. But Zendaya did not rush to fill space with explanation. She let transitions exist without narrative. That patience signaled confidence, not just to the industry, but to herself. Confidence grounded in self-trust is resilient. Another overlooked aspect of her stability is emotional literacy. Zendaya appears comfortable naming limits internally, even when she doesn't name them publicly. That means recognizing when she is stretched, when something doesn't align, when rest is needed. Many people sense these things but override them to meet expectation. She did not. Overriding internal signals is how burnout begins. Zendaya's career shows consistent respect for those signals. That respect preserved her relationship with work. Instead of becoming something that consumes her, work remained something she could engage with fully and step away from without panic. This also affected how she handled praise. Praise can be as destabilizing as criticism when it becomes identity. Zendaya received admiration without allowing it to redefine her worth. She accepted recognition without chasing it. That balance kept her from developing the fragile self-esteem that depends on constant reinforcement. Fragility often hides behind confidence in public figures. Zendaya's confidence reads differently. It feels contained, quiet, rooted. That usually comes from knowing who you are outside of applause. That knowledge doesn't appear magically. It is reinforced by environments that value process over performance. Zendaya appears to have grown up with adults who treated her development as non-negotiable. Fame was not allowed to override childhood entirely. Work did not replace identity. That foundation mattered later, when pressure increased. As expectations expanded, she did not collapse under the weight of being everything to everyone. She narrowed focus instead. Focus reduces overwhelm. It clarifies direction. It prevents dilution. Zendaya's selective engagement became a form of self-respect. Self-respect is the quiet engine of longevity. This stage of her life demonstrates something rarely acknowledged. Growing up famous without falling apart requires more than discipline. It requires permission to be unfinished, to be imperfect, to be private. Zendaya appears to have granted herself that permission, even when the culture did not. That permission made room for authenticity. Authenticity doesn't mean sharing everything. It means behaving consistently with your values, regardless of audience reaction. Zendaya's behavior aligns with restraint, intentionality, and self-awareness. Those traits don't generate drama, but they generate trust. Trust compounds. Over time, collaborators knew what to expect. Audiences sensed sincerity. The media adjusted tone. This feedback loop reinforced stability rather than chaos. Zendaya became someone people worked with long-term, not someone they consumed quickly. Consumption is what breaks people. Zendaya avoided becoming consumable by refusing to be constantly available. She did not turn her growth into content. She did not monetize every phase of her life. She let some experiences remain unspoken, unshared, unresolved in public. That choice preserved wholeness. By now, it is clear that her story is not about avoiding mistakes. It is about creating conditions where mistakes do not become defining. Where growth is allowed to be gradual. Where pressure does not eclipse personhood. This is the opposite of the cautionary tale we are used to. Zendaya's path suggests that the antidote to early fame is not toughness or rebellion, but structure. Not isolation, but selective connection. Not perfection, but alignment. And alignment is what keeps people from falling apart when everything around them moves too fast. This brings the story to its final reflection. What Zendaya's experience ultimately teaches about fame, youth, and the rare circumstances under which success does not come at the cost of self. In the end, Zendaya's story stands out not because it is extraordinary, but because it is intentional. In an industry built on acceleration, she slowed herself down. In a culture that rewards exposure, she practiced restraint. And in a system that often treats young talent as replaceable, she was treated, and learned to treat herself, as irreplaceable. That distinction changes everything. Growing up famous usually creates a split. There is the public self, shaped by expectation, and the private self, shaped by pressure. When those two drift too far apart, instability follows. Zendaya's life suggests a different outcome is possible when the distance between them is kept small. When the person does not become a performance, and the performance does not consume the person. This did not happen by accident. It happened because boundaries were established early and defended consistently. Because guidance did not disappear once success arrived. Because growth was allowed to be gradual rather than demanded on a schedule. And because fame was treated as a condition to be managed, not a reward to be indulged. Zendaya was never positioned as untouchable or perfect. She was positioned as human, with room to learn. That framing mattered. It allowed her to mature without panic, to evolve without erasure, and to make decisions without turning them into statements. The result is someone who feels present in her work without being lost in it. What makes her story important is not that she avoided mistakes, it's that mistakes were never allowed to define her. They were absorbed, corrected, and left behind instead of being amplified into identity. That alone separates her from many young stars whose every misstep becomes a permanent label. Zendaya's stability also exposes a broader truth about fame. Collapse is not inevitable. It is often the result of environments that value output over development, access over safety, and speed over sustainability. Change those conditions, and the outcome changes too. Her life challenges the myth that young success must come with damage. It shows that discipline can be quiet, that confidence can be contained, and that maturity does not require spectacle. It reframes what resilience actually looks like. Not hardness, not rebellion, but regulation. Regulation of pace, regulation of access, regulation of expectation. These are not glamorous skills, but they are life-saving ones. Zendaya did not harden herself to survive fame. She softened the environment around her enough to grow inside it. She did not confuse visibility with value. She did not confuse praise with direction. And she did not confuse pressure with destiny. Instead, she chose alignment. Alignment between who she is privately and who she appears to be publicly. Alignment between her work and her readiness. Alignment between ambition and well-being. That alignment is why her career feels steady instead of volatile, and why her presence feels reassuring instead of exhausting. As she continues forward, there will be new pressures. Fame never fully relaxes its grip. But the foundation she has built, of boundaries, intention, and self-awareness, makes her far more equipped to absorb what comes next. Zendaya's story is not a blueprint that can be copied exactly, but it is proof of concept. Proof that young talent does not have to be sacrificed for success. Proof that fame does not have to hollow people out. Proof that growing up in public does not require falling apart in private. If this story changed how you think about child stardom, celebrity culture, or what making it really costs, then it has done its job. And if you want more long-form documentaries that look past headlines and focus on psychology, power, and the unseen decisions behind public lives, stay with this channel. Subscribe for deeper stories. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And share this video with someone who still believes fame always tells the full story. Because sometimes, the most important part of success is not what we see. It's what was quietly protected along the way.